Kadosh, Boker Or. Masechet Batra Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph 137a1. We just mentioned right now that this entire machloka between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish to do with kinyan perot is kinyan and guf or not, meaning that if you have the fruits, does it consider that you're entitled also ki'ilu to the land or not? Is a machloket tanaim. What do you mean machloket tanaim? The Tanya is we learned to the Braita. Pay attention. Yeah, careful with your coffee. Nechasai lecha ve'acharecha leploni. Yeah, my properties will go to you, and afterwards to somebody else. The first person comes, and he sold it. Hechal, and he enjoyed it. The second person could come and take it out. So one more time, you remember we spoke about the giver, Mr. A, B, C? That was yesterday. So the same concept, but now there's no C. It's basically a giver and Mr. A and B. So what happened was Mr. A came and he sold it. So comes Mr. B and he could take it away from the lekuchot for the purchases. Right? These are the words of Rabbi. Rashbag says, and you only have what's left over. The leftovers, that's all you get. You get leftovers. Yeah? So so we have a contradiction. So it comes out that Rashbag and Rabbi is the same machloket. That's the way that it is. So says the Gemara, do you want to just pass me his phone? Yeah. Urmini, we have a contradiction. Nechasai lecha v'acharecha leploni. If a person comes and he says, my properties are going to you, and then afterwards to Mr. B, right? Yored harishon u'mocher ve'ochel, right? It comes down, right? And he's going to sell it. He's going to be able to. Rashbag says, what are you talking about? He could only come and he could only eat the fruits. So kasha de Rabbi. Here you have a stira between Rabbi and Rabbi. Rashbag before said that you only have the leftovers. Here Rashbag is saying that you only have the fruits. You can't even sell anything. So that's a stira contradiction in Rashbag, between Rashbag and Rashbag. It's also stira between Rabbi and Rabbi, because in the first one, he came and he said, right, that he could be motzimi ha-lekuchot. He could take out, meaning Mr. B could come and take out from the lekuchot that the Mr. A sold. And here he's saying, what are you talking about? If right now he comes and he says, he could just, so now it's going, you're allowed to. So it's this contradiction between Rabbi and Rashbag and Rashbag. So says the Gemara, the Rabbi lakashia. It's not a contradiction between Rabbi and Rabbi. Why? Halegufa halepeira. He says, right, if you're looking at the first braita, that the second one could take out of the lekuchot, we're talking about the guf, the actual property. You're right. For sure, according to Rabbi, you could take out the property from the person, but the second one, some of the perot. When he says, yored arishon mocher ve'ochel, it's only talking about the perot. You're not talking about selling the land. You're selling the fruits. Or you could eat the fruits, but not the land. So according to Rabbi, when we said that you're going to take out of the lekuchot, we're talking about the actual body of the karka, the actual land. When we said you could go down and sell, or you could eat some of the fruits, not the land. So it makes sense. Right? Makes sense. It's not a question either. What does that mean? According to Rashbag said that he only has the perot, correct? That's lechatchila. But b'diavad, if he came and he sold the properties, it's also sold. Meaning there's a din lechatchila and a din b'diavad. Lechatchila, he only has the perot. But b'diavad, he even has, right, everything else as well.
Already, and then b'diavad it's done.
Exactly. Okay?
That's who is that?
That's Rashbag. Rashbag. There's not going to be a contradiction. Okay? Okay. Until here we're clear. Fine. Amar Abaye. Yeah, basically what we're trying to say is that there are two different cases, meaning that the two different brightot are speaking about different things. Right, different cases, and therefore there's no problem. Okay? Fine. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Ezeu Rasha Arum. You listening? Sometimes you have an Rasha Arum. Arum. Huh? He's usually, without clothing, right? Bare. Right? He says, Who's a Rasha Arum? He comes and he gives you, right, the etzah to sell. Yeah? b'nechasim kerashbag. That's a rasha arum. What does that mean? Here it's ki'ilu, right? What do we say? We said b'diavad, according to Rashbag. If you come and you sold it, is it a good sale? Yes. Because we said there's lechatchila. Lechatchila, it's only the perot. But diavad, even if you sold the property, it's going to be sold. Who's at a sha'arum? If you come and you tell the guy, by the way, he gave it to you, but it's only for short term. After you, it's going to Mr. B. So if you give an etzah, yeah, which is basically going to be a bad advice because you're mamash, you're rasha. You're mamash. He says here the noten etzah is called a rasha because he's chotev velolo, meaning what are you gaining from it? You're giving him an advice to do an avera, and you're not even gaining from it. That's why you're considered a rasha. So you're giving him the advice. Now, why is it called a rum? Because etzato is mitkayemet, and therefore it's going to be chala b'diavad. So it's keilu. That's why he's saying it's like a rasha, which is like a trickster, one of these con artists. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be good. The sale is going to take place, but you are a rasha. You are a person that look what you're doing, right? Yeah, ramaya this rasha arum. Yeah, mamash. It's a powerful statement. Yeah, huh?
No. It's like this.
Yeah.
Means he went to the line and he took advantage.
So Amar Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Yochanan halacha zek rashbag, halacha zek Rabbi Gamliel umodeh. That means basically whatever's left over from the first one goes to the second one. So he says umodeh rashbag, but rashbag is going to be modeh. She nitanan matanat shchivina, that he gave it as a present, lo asaklum. Meaning, if this guy comes and he gave it as a present, as a shchivmira, then it doesn't work. Meaning, remember that you have the noten. The noten comes and he gives it to Mr. A, and then you have the Mr. B. If right now, right, what happens is that he comes and he's going to give it as a shchivmira, meaning he's on his deathbed, and all of a sudden Mr. A comes and he says, you know what? I'm giving it now to Mr. Z. Yeah, Mr. Z.
Yeah? The donor is a shchivmira, right?
Which one? No, not the donor. The Mr. A. Mr. A is a shchivmira. And he gave it to Mr. Z. Right?
It's not his prerogative.
So that's why he didn't do anything. No, Mr. A is sick. He's a shchivmira. He's lying on his deathbed. And no, the noten is Mr. Giver. The noten, the giver is Mr. Giver. Giver, because you don't want to get confused. The giver comes and he gives it. No, one more time. The giver comes and he says it's to Mr. A after he dies, and afterwards Mr. B. The guy dies. The giver dies. Giver Kaddish. He's saying Kaddish for him. He was very happy. He got a property. So Mr. A comes, right? And he's enjoying the property. Right? Now, after Mr. A, who's supposed to get it? Mr. B. What happens is Mr. A gets sick towards the end of his life. And he says, you know what? Mr. Z. Right? Or Z. That's what I told you, Canada. Yeah? It's going to Mr. Z. Says the Rashbag, lo asav lo klum. No, but because we said that according to Rashbag, if he sold it, if Mr. A sold it to somebody else, it is going to be good. Lechatchila, he's not allowed to sell it. But if he did sell it, it is good. And we said halakha like Rashbag. At the end, nothing. According to Rashbag. According to Rabbi, yes, you could take it out. According to Rashbag, nada. Yeah? So says the Gemara, right? He says, my tama, what's the reasoning? Amar Abaye says, right? Matanat shchivmira lo kana ela kvar kadamo leachar mita. When does matanat shchivmira fall into place? Only after death. He says after death, Mr. B was already there. So since Mr. B was already there before the Mr. Z or Mr. Z is going to take anything, so therefore it doesn't help. So says the Gemara, does Abaye actually say that? He says, Vayit Mare was stated, Matanat shchivmira mematay kana. When is it going to acquire it? Abaye amar in gmar mita, right, with the end of the death. After the death, meaning it actually comes out that there's a machloket. When does the matanat shchivmira fall into place? Is it with death or is it after death? So therefore, if you're going to tell me that it's after death, so you're right. He went as a matanat shchivmira, he gave it as a present. He dies. If it's only after death, Mr. B already preceded this guy, right? The one that received the present of the matanat shchivmira. No. The sick one dies. Mr. B preceded not the sick, the person.
Was acquired before he died.
One more time. No. One more time. He says it's going to you, and after you going to Mr. B. Mr. A is on a sick bed. Mr. A comes and he says he's giving it as a present to Mr. X. Present to Mr. X. When does Mr. X acquire it? If you no,
not supposed to acquire it. Period.
he doesn't acquire it. It's so he says, when does he acquire it? Only after Gemar Mita. So says the Gemara, if it's only after Gemar Mita, Mr. B preceded the Mr. X, because Mr. B was already the first in line, that after Mita of the Mr. A, of the sick person, right? Who's supposed to get it? Mr. B. So Mr. B preceded Mr. X.
Because of that, but also because the transaction is null.
No, because if you already gave it with beforehand, then it doesn't. So he says, by attracted. So how says the Gemara, how do you know you're attracted? Maybe he was attracted from the other one. So he says, as we learned in the Mishnah, a person comes and he gives a get to his wife. Are you listening? A person comes and he gives a get to his wife. Yeah? And he comes and he says, this is your get if I die. Or this is your get, right? If he dies from this sickness. He doesn't want her to go into Yibum, right? It could be, or to be no, not an aguna. If he dies Kaddish, it's never an aguna.
I want to pay her a gift.
Right? It's never going to be an aguna. If he dies. No, it's either for Yibum. So sometimes, even if they had kids, many times they would prefer to be divorced than a widow. Because a widow is like, it's like a black widow. It's like, bad mazal. It's a divorce. She's divorced. In many places it happened, right? In many, many places, not only in Morocco, but in many places, the second that a woman would become a widow, she would never get remarried. It wasn't halacha. Halacha, she could get married after, whatever it is, right? But not long. It was like a bad mazal. And she always had like the name of the thing. So kilu that she never got married again. Why? She's a widow now. She can't get married to a woman. Fine. Okay, fine. But for her, it's worth it. For her, it's worth it. No, not financial. It's a different terminology. Yes, it's a different status. A woman that she has the status of a widow, it's like, as I say, it's like a bad luck. It's a bad siman. It's a bad omen. Yes. So people don't want to come and you have to be careful. This, that. Yeah. Well, the black widow is 2 times according to Rabbi and 3 times according to Shbag. It's machloket. You understand? So she's already strike 1. How many strikes does the guy need? You understand? Well, strike 1, strike 2, strike 3. Huh? Isha katlanit. That's the black. Why is it called black widow? Because there's a black spider, right? That she comes. Did you ever know this, David? Écoute-moi. Did you ever know this? There's a black spider that she comes. She mates. It's a black spider. That's a black widow. She comes. She mates with the husband. Basically, she has a child and she kills the husband. That's called the black widow. Why do you think that the Isha katlanit is killing the husband? That's called Isha katlanit. Katla is to kill. Isha katlanit. Yeah? Yeah? No, she kills him 100%. Amar Rabbi Zera, says Rabbi Zera in the name of Yochanan, Halachas like Rashbag, Shafilu ayu ba'im, bahen avadim ve'otzian lechirut. Even if they had, right, properties and avadim, and the Mkabel Rishon comes and he took them out and he freed them. Yeah? That means mamash, the guy comes and he got slaves and he comes, he starts freeing them. He's like, Mr. B's like, what's going on over here? I'm losing everything over here. Why? Because Mr. A is just, getting rid of all the property. He's just liquidating it. So says the Gemara Pshita, obviously. So he says, I would have thought to say, yes, what does that mean? You're not allowed to free a slave. Leolam bahem ta'avodu. What is leolam bahem ta'avodu? You have an isur doraita. You're not allowed to free a slave. So you remember in the Gemara, right, with if he pays himself, or for example, they did it a mitzvah, so they freed the slave, right, tevi avdi, in order to be mashlim minyan, right? So fine. But if it's not doing a mitzvah, it's a sur. So he says, I would have thought to say that the only reason why they gave it to Mr. A was not to do an avirah. So the fact that Mr. A came now and he started freeing the slaves, he's doing an avirah, so he has no rights. Kamash malan, that he still has the rights, he could free the slave. And then Mr. B lose that on the slaves. Why? Because Mr. A already freed the slaves. Amar Rav Yosef says what you said in Rabbi Yochanan, halacha zeker shbag. Afilu asan tachrichin lemet. Even if he came, right, and he made them tachrichim for the deceased, meaning they made shrouds for the first one, for Mr. A. That means he took the property, made him shrouds. He's allowed to. Says the Pshita, obviously, why not? She says, I would have thought there's shrouds on a deceased. It's asur bana. You're not allowed to benefit from anything of the deceased. There's a whole question: what happens if a person passes away and he's got a gold tooth? In the olden days, gold tooth was very expensive. Yeah, so there's a whole question: can you take it out? Not this, that, that. There's a lot of what to talk about. So therefore, he says it becomes isur na. So kamash malan, right? I don't know. So he says kamash malan. What do we come to teach you? Right? That there's no problem with the isur na here. Tarashav Nachman bar Chasta etrog ze natun lecha b'matana. Imagine right now I come and I give you an etrog as a present, and then afterwards it has to go to somebody else. So the first person comes, you say the chobah, the love and etrog. This is a machlok between Rabbi and Rashbag. Why? According to Rabbi, you weren't Yitzhak Chobah. Why? Because you only have kinyan perot. It's not yours. So you're not Yitzhak Chobah in love and etrog. But according to Rashbag, you are. So matkif la Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, ask Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, hakal lo pligi Rabbi v'Rashbag hatam. There's no machlok between Rabbi and Rashbag over there. Ela demor savar kinyan perot kinyan guf dami more savar kinyan perot la kinyan guf dami. That the machloket is whether you hold kinyan perot is like kinyan guf or not. Ela hacha, but here to do with the trog kuf la mezayim mubet 137b. Imei pak lo nafik bei lemaya avina nihale. He says if he's going to take the lulav and the trog and he's not going to be yitzed chovah, so therefore what are you giving it to him for? Why in the world are you giving it to him? Right? It just doesn't make sense. Ela, but rather, meipak, right? It means you're going to be yitzed chovah, the trog. The chule alma lo plige the nafik be, because everybody agrees that you're going to be yitzed chovah mechara o chalav only if he sold it and he ate it. That is a machloket between Rabbi and Rashbag. But to be yitzed chovah mitzvat of lulav and etrog, there's no problem. There's no problem. Okay? Amar Rabba Baravuna, says Rabba Baravuna, Ha'achin shekanu etrog betfusat habayit. If the brothers come and they bought an etrog from the estate of the house, the Yerusha, untalo echad mehem v'yatza bo, one of them comes and he's yitzei chovah. Im yachol leochlo, if he could eat it, he's going to be yitzei chovah. V'im lav lo yatza. V'davka dika etrog l'chol v'chad. But that's only if every single one has an etrog. Aval parish or rimon. But if they only have a chavush or rimon or pomegranate, lo, nobody's going to be yitzei chovah because basically they're all partners in it. So therefore, again, it's not yours. Remember, ulkachtem lachem bayom harishon. It has to be yours. Okay? So Amar Rava says, etrog ze netun lecha b'matana, right? Al menat shetachziru li, matana al menat lachzir. By the way, this is what we actually do. Matana al menat lachzir, right? So he said, netzov yatza bo, right? He's going to be yitzeh chovah. Zero yatza. Lo yachziro, but if he never give it back, then he's not going to be yitzeh chovah. But since you said it's al menat lachzir, right, you're not yitzeh chovah. Right? Very important. So that's why, you make sure that it's going to be a minal achzir. Kamash malan, matana minal achzir, shema matana. That's what we actually say. Matana minal achzir is called a matana. So I give you two as a present, and I tell you, this is a matana minal achzir. It's a present on condition that you give it back to me. So as long as you give it back to me, you're yitzei chovah, the lulav, and the etrog. Capish? Okay. Story time. Yeah? Now we're talking. Hayi iteta. There was a woman. Yeah, we should put up the air. There was a woman, Tehavala Dikla, that she had a dekel be'ara in the land of Rabbi Barabai. Well, Ema Tehavat Azla Lemigzere. Every single time she used to come and cut the fruits, have a kapi deleva. He was makpid. He didn't want her to go in. Aknita niale. So she went and she kol shnei chayav, right? And afterwards it would go to her. Azal ihu. He went. He gave it to his younger child. The guy was smart. He gave it to his younger child, just like Rashbag, right? So he knew that he did give it to his child. Amar mishum datu mimulai, right? Because you guys come from the city of Mimaleh, amnitu mulimuliata. You guys are going to say things which are full and that are not actually fitting. Even according to Rashbag lo kamar ela acher. It's only if you give it to somebody else. But leatzmo lo. Meaning here, the guy thought that he actually did a smart one. He pulled a fast one that he gave it to his son. It's never if you give it to your family member, to yourself. It's only if you give it to somebody else. Meaning, when does Rashbag say that if you sold it to somebody else, it's going to be good? You sold it to somebody else, not to your own family member. Okay? So, Amar Rav Nachman says, Shor zenu, right? He says, B'matana, this ox is given to you as a present. That you give it back to me. He consecrated it. And then he gave it back to him. So he says, that is a mukdash or mukzah. it's consecrated, and he has to give it, and he gave it back. What did he give him back? He has to give it out to the Ekdesh. Amarle, he says, but what's lacking? So Elam Ravashi, but rather Ravashi says, Chazina ni Amarle, we're going to see Amenat Shetachzideu. Right, you have to give it back. Hadre, he gave it back. But if he says Amenat Shetachzideu li, you give it back to me, it means it has to be, meaning not just on the Amenat that you give it back, you have to give it back to me. When you say to me, it means that I have to be able to use it. If you just say, I'm not give it back, I'll give it back. But now you can't use it. So Amar Rav Yidam Shmuel Kotev Nechasav. Somebody is going to write the properties Lacher to somebody else. Hala, and the other person says, I don't want them. Kana, he's going to be koneh. Right? Vafilu Omev Tzoveach, even if he's screaming. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lo Kana. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you're not going to acquire them. So Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Mama V'lo Pligi, but it's not a machlok between them. Right? Kufla Midchet Amud Aleph on the top. Kan Mitzoveach Minkara, Kan Mishotek Minkara V'asot Tzoveach. It all depends. If you were screaming at the beginning, right, at the beginning, so therefore you don't want the present, so I can't force you to take a present. But he says here in the second one, we're talking about at the beginning, you were quiet about it, meaning you accepted it. Only afterwards did you come and you start screaming that you didn't want it. In such a case, you are already going to be Zoche. We'll continue with Zat Hashem.